This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And so I want to give a special thank you to Michael Fenton, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 395 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new live-action Star Wars series, The Mandalorian, created by Jon Favreau. And this will involve spoilers for all of Season 1, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Erin Lindsey, making her 17th appearance on the show. She's the author of the Rose Gallagher series of historical mysteries from Minotaur, the Bloodbound series of epic fantasy novels from Ace, and the Nicholas Lenoir series of paranormal detective novels from Rock, which she writes under the name Yale Tetensor. Her latest Rose Gallagher mystery, A Golden Grave, is out now. So Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Always happy to be here.
The next up, we've got Rajan Khanna, making his 14th appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Lightspeed, Shimmer, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. His articles have appeared on Tor.com and LitReactor.com. So Raj, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
And also joining us today is Matthew Kressel, making his 9th appearance on the show. He's the author of the novel King of Shards, and his short story The Last Novelist, or A Dead Lizard in the Yard, was nominated for the Nebula Award and was a finalist for the Eugene Foster Memorial Award. His new novel Queen of Static is available now on his Patreon page over at patreon.com/Matt Kressel. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me back.
All right, and so I'm just a little curious, Matt, about, it's in your bio that you're serializing your second novel, Queen of Static, over on Patreon. So what made you decide to do that?
Because it's exactly 52 chapters and I can do one a week, and then that's not it just so happened to turn out that it was 52 chapters, which I was like, that's interesting. Well, it's kind of a long, convoluted story, but basically, a lot of people have been asking me for the sequel of King of Shards for a long time, and I've had some publisher interest, but everyone's sort of dragging their feet. And I was like, you know what? This book's out. It's finished. It's been edited. It's been copy edited. And I just wanted to try out a Patreon and see what that experience would be like. I have several author friends who have Patreons, and it seems to work well for them. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it and see what happens. And then I'm going to release it as a trade paperback when it's all done.
Yeah, it's got cover art and everything. I mean, it really looks nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the cover artist is Leon Tucker, and we first found him on DeviantArt back with King of Shards, and he was just starting out as a graphic artist, as a concept artist, and we just asked him, and he gave us the first cover for very, very inexpensively. If you look now, he has exploded. He's just doing everything everywhere, and he's just huge and big. And I was like, oh, that's really cool that I got to get 2 covers from him, for my book. I'm not sure now that I would be able to afford his rates.
So is there a certain amount of money people have to pledge to be able to read your chapters?
Yeah, it's $2 a month, $2 a month, and you get a chapter every 2 weeks. You also get excerpts of stories that I'm working on. If I'm going to release any ebooks in that period of short stories, you're going to get free copies of that, and also you get a free copy of King of Shards as well. So, and I'm going to be doing regular blog posts about writing, about my experience editing Sybil's Garage. I co-host the Fantastic Fiction Reading Series. So basically, talking about my quote-unquote writing life.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So everyone, again, go check that out over at patreon.com/Matt Kressel. And I wanted to talk about that because I'm always really interested in people doing, experimenting with different business opportunities and writing and things like that. And also because I'm just sort of delaying because I don't want to bring up the Rise of Skywalker. But I think I kind of have to because so going into the show The Mandalorian, this is coming right on the heels of the feature film The Rise of Skywalker, which I always say is Rise of the Skywalker. It's a kind of a thing I have, but anyway, The Rise of Skywalker, which I just thought was junk. And so I
just want to say right up front that I haven't seen it yet because I know it's, oh my God, you haven't seen it, but it's just been a busy couple of weeks with my wife and I were dealing with some family stuff, and I haven't seen it. But if you need to spoil it, I won't be upset.
No, I'm not planning to have any spoilers. But I'm just sort of curious. I'm just curious if anyone thought it wasn't junk. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Justify why it's not junk.
Yeah. Did you think it was junk, Erin, or not?
I don't know if I would go that far, but it was certainly disappointing. I read somewhere somebody said it looked like something that had been written by AI, and I really agree.
Oh, man.
I remember having the reaction in The Force Awakens that certain elements of it looked like somebody had taken the original trilogy, cut it into little pieces, thrown it in the air, and then glued it back together in a different order. But it was in a different order that largely worked, for me anyway. And this was like the same methodology, only it didn't work at all. And it just, it's a shame because I think the broad strokes, the big storytelling choices were, even if I didn't always agree with them, I thought that they were interesting storytelling choices, but it was just all the little things that they got so wrong so many times over that it was just so frustrating.
Yeah. Raj, what'd you think?
So, this is going to be a little controversial maybe, but the first time I saw it, I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it in the theater, I actually enjoyed it. Like it finished and I thought, oh, that was decent. And I think I was relieved that it wasn't terrible, or I didn't feel like it was terrible. I think for me, some of the previous movies had moments where I literally like winced as I was watching them. And this one, at least the first time through, I didn't have that reaction. And so it felt like it was better in many ways. And I agree that there were some, the broad stroke decisions I think worked for me for a lot of it. I saw it again, and then I started seeing what people were talking about in terms of the criticism and how it doesn't kind of hold up. And I will say that it's not a movie that I see myself going back to anytime soon. Like, it's not one I want to watch again and again, like some of the other ones that I've seen. But I think a part of it for me is that I think having been watching Star Wars movies for over 40 years now, I've learned, like I've developed a way to create my own story in my head as I'm watching these movies. And that probably started even back as far back as Return of the Jedi, which I also have some issues with. So from then on, through the prequels and through everything that came afterwards, I think I take the things on the screen that work for me, and then I kind of in my head go, well, that's not really what they did there. They did something else. And so I am able to enjoy stuff by like soft focusing parts of these movies and kind of inventing my own extra justification for things or whatever. So I think that's almost like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but like a survival mechanism for me to maintain my enjoyment of the whole thing, without just getting annoyed and frustrated and angry. So, but I can definitely see a lot of the criticisms, and I look at the new movies and I think that they're in a different category. So, sure, they're Star Wars, but they're not like, they don't touch me in the same way that the original movies did, though I still think they're better than the prequels. So, but just to go back to The Mandalorian, like the fact that we have things like that coming out and we've wrapped up this 9-movie saga is kind of like a relief for me. Like I like that they've, at least for the moment, put a capstone on that story that's been dragging on for a while. My biggest feeling of this movie is just relief that we're done with it, which is not, it's not I guess that's not a compliment to the series, but I've been following this stuff for most of my life. And so it's nice to just kind of be free of it in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I could see you enjoying them. I could see people enjoying the movie. I mean, but I was just sort of bored. I thought it was just predictable, and, it sort of undid in my mind everything interesting that Rian Johnson tried to do in The Last Jedi, and just substituted really safe choices and
There was definitely some walking back.
Yeah. So I mean, so I was I was just bored overall.
And that's a shame too, because I feel like we'll never know. No one would ever admit it one way or the other. But to what degree those decisions that were walked back, to what degree they were walked back as a result of fan backlash. And I think that would be a really disturbing precedent, that we're essentially crowdsourcing storytelling at this point, particularly when the crowd in question, some of the most vocal elements of it, are just, toxic and wrong-headed. And there's no defending, speaking of storytelling choices, there's no defending what they did with the character of Rose, for example. They tried to defend it. It was a weak defense. And although I do believe that they didn't consciously do it as a way of, they didn't sideline that character in an overt effort to please the trolls, that I do believe. I can't believe how tone deaf they were in the choices that they made, and making it look like and essentially handing a victory to the trolls. And I think walking back some of the Last Jedi kind of has the same effect. And that for me is the most frustrating part of it, is that the things that they got the most wrong were some of the things that are hardest to understand why they got wrong, because they were all fairly low hanging fruit in terms of, just decisions and dialogue and things like that. But that being said, I totally agree with you, Raj, that I think we lived in a different time. When the original trilogy came out, we weren't nearly collectively as critical as we are now. And I kind of mourn that innocence to a degree. We were walking out of the theater and my brother's going on about bad acting. I'm like, okay, but are we going to come in, rock up in movie number 9 and start talking about bad acting in Star Wars? Because that's, at this point, that's just, if there weren't bad acting, it wouldn't be a real Star Wars movie.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I don't want to leave Matt out of this conversation, and I promise no spoilers. And I don't know if I have a lot more to say about the movie without getting into spoilers. I think some of the fan stuff we'll maybe come back as we talk about The Mandalorian. But so let's get into that. So there's this new show, The Mandalorian. It's the first live action Star Wars TV show or TV series ever. And in order to watch it, you have to subscribe to Disney Plus, which is Disney's new streaming service. And this is sort of they have all the Marvel movies and all the old Disney movies and everything, the Pixar movies. But the main inducement to sign up for Disney Plus, at least initially, is this show, The Mandalorian. And I mentioned that it was created by Jon Favreau, who directed Iron Man and Iron Man 2. And this guy, Dave Filoni, who I think is sort of the showrunner of the Star Wars animated series, like Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff like that. I think was basically his partner in creating this. And so Matt, what did you kind of think going into The Mandalorian?
I was optimistic going in. I had been kind of disappointed by the recent movies. So I was going in slightly skeptical, but also, Jon Favreau, I like his films. I think he's a good director. So I was going in hoping that, I've always felt that with the Star Wars films, especially the later ones, is that they're trying to cram too much story into these 2.5 hour plots. And I thought that the TV medium offers the time to really explore a character. And I thought, wow, you could really take some time in the Star Wars universe, because there's so much there. There's so much culture, every planet, the species, all this stuff. And I wanted to see that explored. I wanted to kind of go on a tour of this world, in a sense. And I really wanted to take some time with a character and have them be developed. So I was optimistic going in, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh boy, I hope this isn't going to be just thrown together and kind of a hodgepodge like I felt some of the movies were.
Yeah. So I mean, I just went back and listened to a little bit of our Solo movie panel that all three of you guys were panelists on. And that's one of the things that was one of our big takeaways from the Solo movie, was that they were just trying to cover too much stuff in this feature film format. And we were saying, really, the Han Solo story seems like it would be tailor-made for television. So, I don't know, maybe they listened to that and Yeah.
That's probably it.
But
Your check's in the mail.
So how about Raj? What were you sort of expecting out of The Mandalorian?
I mean, to be honest, I think I was cautiously optimistic. I think Mandalorians in general and the Star Wars lore are one of my favorite things. Like growing up, Boba Fett was my favorite character. And then, they're detailed a little bit more in, I think, Clone Wars and Rebels and things like that. But I've always just loved that design and, learning more about their culture and, why they wear that armor and all that kind of stuff. So I think I was definitely cautiously optimistic that that was the topic of this. And I tried not to watch or read about too much before I saw it. But, the stills that I saw and the art design and set design or whatever, all looked great. So I was hoping that it was going to be good. But I really went into it kind of blindly, hoping that it would. I guess I've learned with Star Wars too, just to keep my expectations as low as possible so that I'm more pleasantly surprised than horribly disappointed.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here with my my Boba Fett alarm clock and my Boba Fett mugs and all this, because he was definitely my favorite action figure. When I was a kid, I had all the Star Wars action figures, and I always had Boba Fett was always the star of my little, games. Even though we didn't actually have Empire Strikes Back on VHS, we only had the original Star Wars. And so, I had only the vaguest memory of the character from the actual movies, but I just love the action figure so much. And, he just did all sorts. You could sort of see, he had the jetpack and the grappling hook and stuff. And so, I mean, there's definitely an appeal to that character. How about Erin? Any thoughts on Boba Fett or your expectations going into The Mandalorian?
I mean, I have all kinds of thoughts on Boba Fett. I have a Boba Fett keychain. I'm still not quite over the way Boba Fett ends his career. I think that's totally disappointing. I think my approach going in was largely the same as the others, cautious optimism. I think there were a lot of reasons to be hopeful that the series would explore some corners of the Star Wars universe that we hadn't really poked our noses into yet. Lots of opportunities for world building that, particularly when you're taking such a fast and furious narrative driven approach to the feature films, there's not a lot of time for world building in there. And so it seemed like there was potentially a lot of material to explore. So I liked that idea. I also deliberately didn't follow the sort of breathless anticipation online so that I didn't have much in the way of expectations going in or foreknowledge. There were certainly some names attached to the project that excited me. Somehow or another, I did not come across Pedro Pascal's name. So that was a surprise. I spent the first 2 episodes going, who is that? I know that guy. So that was a pleasant surprise. But, that I knew that, of course, Jon Favreau was attached to it, and I really liked what he did with the Iron Man movies. And I've liked some of his other non-comic book directorial forays. So I was excited about that. Love Taika Waititi. Everything that he does is hilarious. And so I really loved what he did with Ragnarok, which is, I think, my favorite MCU film. So I was excited, and I had a sort of a conscious choice to control my expectations, but I was excited for sure.
Mm. And so Matt, did you feel like, so you went in sort of cautiously optimistic. So what was your impression of the first episode or two?
I love the first 2 episodes. The first 2 episodes, I got so excited that I made my friends watch them as well because they were sort of skeptical. And I was like, you need to watch this. This is really good. The first episode clearly is playing off of tropes. They're playing off, the stranger comes to town, the gunslinger, a lot of, there's a Clint Eastwood trope in there, but I like that. I'm like, okay, I get it. We're starting off with a new character. We don't know his personality. You have to play off tropes a little bit. You have to go with stereotypes, and then you slowly develop a character that, individuates him. So I thought it was cool. It had everything that I wanted in a Star Wars TV show. It had like, the lore, like, it had the CD bar, it had the land speeder, it had like the monsters, the spaceships, and the mystery, like the Baby Yoda mystery, I thought was quite cool. The droid. So the first two episodes really got me excited. Then I saw the rest of the series, but like the Jawas, I thought it was like that was the first time we really ever. Well, we see the Jawas in A New Hope, the episode 4, but I feel like we got to know them a little bit more in episode 2, and that was cool. And like a little bit of their culture, and I was like, oh well, that's what a TV series can do. It can explore things a little bit more. Where I think the show started to falter was
okay. Wait, well, let's
okay,
say that.
All right.
All right. So, but you like that,
Yeah.
and I agree. I mean, I actually, my parents were visiting for the holidays, and so I watched the show with my dad, and it was really bringing back memories of watching like the Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. with my dad, which I don't remember the show that well. It's a Western. I think it's sort of a weird Western or steampunk Western or something, but I just vividly remember the feeling of watching that show with my dad. And this really brought back those memories because it does have, as you're saying, this very distinct Western, Old West kind of vibe to it. And I know, Raj, you're a huge fan of Old West kind of stuff, right? So did you connect with that in this show?
I definitely did. That love was documented on this podcast actually previously. So, so a friend of mine had actually told me that it was very Western. And so I was excited about that. But the way that they nailed that vibe, I think really worked for me. And as Matt said, it's a tropey kind of thing. But one of the things I've always wanted to see from the Star Wars universe is them tackling other genres, like not just space opera, but Western, thriller, spy stuff, whatever. And I think the universe is deep enough and broad enough to handle that. And so to see this, Western feel worked really well for me. I loved how Pedro Pascal plays the character. Also, my love for Pedro Pascal, I think, is also documented on this program from when we did Prospect. But I think everything about the tone felt right. And I agree that the first two episodes, I didn't have time to go back and rewatch the whole thing, but I will rewatch the first episode, and it's really strong. And part of it is the feel, and part of it is the attention they paid to the detail of creating, these little mini worlds from week to week. It feels very Star Wars, and I think they went back to evoke kind of an original trilogy feel. Obviously, this takes place just after, I guess, Return of the Jedi. But, you see familiar aliens and droids and, the little talking, I don't know, doorbell droid or whatever that comes out, is very familiar. And all of that I thought was really great because that's what I want to see. I want to see this being this shared universe that exists in different places. But I also really enjoyed the scale, the fact that we're not talking about the fate of the universe. We're not talking about, Jedi and the Sith and the Force and all this kind of stuff. It's really about this guy and his job and his personal life and, a much smaller scale, which felt really refreshing to me.
Yeah, and I totally agree about the tone, really capturing the tone of the original trilogy. And to me, even capturing the tone very specifically of A New Hope. Like, I almost feel like the tone of this feels more like A New Hope to me, even than Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, just in terms of the sort of like, I don't know, more sort of fun, simple, innocent, as you say, like not the Force is just sort of a seasoning rather than the main dish. And so, I thought it did a really great job of capturing what it felt like for me to watch A New Hope in my grandma's basement, as a kid. But so I went into this, I actually went into this with fairly low expectations just because the Star Wars stuff has been so uneven. And then, I had all the Baby Yoda stuff totally spoiled. I didn't get a chance to watch this right away. So like, I'd already seen like 2 weeks of Baby Yoda, memes by the time I actually got around to watching the show. And then also I had low expectations because like Erin told me that she hated it. So
speaking of spoilers,
that was kind of a giant buzzkill for me. But so Erin, so you said that you emailed me. You'd watched like 3 episodes, I think, and you're like, I'm not into this. So what was going on there? I
didn't hate it. I was very much in a sort of a meh space. which I never fully emerged out of. I think my overall comment on the series is that it was highly uneven for me. I found my enjoyment of episode to episode varied enormously. And, you know, we can talk about that in more detail when we go into specific episodes. But, yeah, I was underwhelmed. I liked the first episode quite a bit. And then I was underwhelmed by the next handful. And I think part of it is because I am a passionate lover of Westerns. I just wrote a Western, by the way, which was fun. I highly recommend it. Gets all your
you could say the title.
All your yahoos. I don't know.
Oh.
But thanks.
I guess you couldn't say the title if you want.
It's that recently that I'm like fully in a Western frame of mind. And I think that was an obvious choice and the right choice when you're telling the story of a bounty hunter. It works really well. And as we saw with Logan, the intersection between a comic book hero, or, you know, a spec fic hero and a Western works really well, or can work really well. But I guess my disappointment was twofold. One, if you're going to do a sci-fi Western, like a space opera Western, I kept unconsciously in my head, I think, comparing it to Firefly. And not flatteringly. I thought that the storytelling, again, obviously fairly uneven, but I thought that the storytelling in Firefly was largely more enjoyable to me for a few different reasons. And one of them is that they just took a much less obvious approach. So yes, there are a lot of tropes in Westerns that we expect, but you don't have to present them in such an unadulterated fashion. And I would have liked for things to be a little less obvious than they were. I kind of felt like every beat of the story was totally predictable. And there was of necessity not enough character depth to kind of make up for that. Which is, you know, it's nobody's fault. Your main character doesn't say much and he's behind a mask that he refuses to take off. So there's only so much that you can do with that in terms of character development. And I thought they did as well as they could have under those conditions. But I just thought it was really obvious. And I wanted more exploration. I thought they could have gone further with the Jawas or gone further with some of those elements. And I also thought that they were quite clunky about certain things. Like, for example, some of the early flashback scenes of the Mandalorian's traumatic childhood, I thought was so overdone and so clumsy.
Yeah.
And it just could have been better. And the music was so bombastic. And I was like, this is just letting the side down.
All right. Well, let me jump in there. So I'll just say, like, I freaking love this show. I love every episode. I love everything about it. So I may be the main defender of this on the panel, unless, let's see, I guess Matt says we sort of went downhill for him. Raj, do you think you like this less than I do?
Possible. I mean, it's a weird thing because I love the show. I agree that there were a few episodes in the middle that didn't completely work for me, but I guess as a series and one that's coming back that we've heard now, I see a lot of promise in it, and I feel like, you know, if they correct some of the things, it can be really great. But I will rewatch this all the way through again and probably again. I just love what they're doing. I think I again, because I'm tired of the whole movie saga, I think this gives me a lot of, I mean, for lack of a better term, a new hope for the universe and for the Star Wars, media empire. So I don't know. It's a weird thing where I can see the criticism, but I do enjoy the show and I enjoy the approach they're taking, but you probably do like it more than I do.
I mean, it's interesting. It sounds like part of Erin's issue was just that she's so familiar with the tropes of Westerns that this came across to her as sort of tired. I'm not that into Westerns, so maybe that didn't bug me as much. But Raj, you are really into Westerns, so if you liked it, maybe that hypothesis doesn't explain a whole lot. But I
mean, I don't think there are ever enough Westerns for me. So and again, Star Wars Western, I mean, you know, there are Western elements in the original trilogy, definitely, but just, it didn't bother me that they were leaning really hard into it. And actually, you know, I think it hit the right buttons for me. Like, it felt comforting and and reassuring. And I think they did a lot of work, at least for me, in putting a lot of those details in that evoked Star Wars, that I felt like it just worked. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll note that, this is currently 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and although, when I asked our Facebook listeners what they thought, everyone was just really, really excited about it. So, I mean, definitely it works for a lot of people.
And can I just say on the flip side, like the kind of the direct opposite of what Raj said is like, as many issues as I had with it, I also can see how people are excited about it. And I certainly came away with the feeling that once they find their feet, which I think they started to toward the end of the season, I came away optimistic that season 2 will be better and exciting.
Well, so Matt, you said you liked the first couple episodes and then it went downhill for you. Like at what point did it kind of lose you?
Well, like I said, the first 2 episodes are playing off of tropes, and I think they need to do that to just kind of draw you in. But I wanted them to develop it further, and I really felt that they, the Mandalorian he's just a cipher, and that you get tiny little glimpses of who he is, but every time they give you a glimpse, it's a cliche. I've never shown my face to anyone, and those flashbacks. It was the same thing over and over again, and it didn't really add anything to it. So he's an orphan. He's been raised by the Mandalorians. Who is he? What are his values? What does he think? Does he have any great desires? Like, I never got any of that. And that, to me, was the biggest...
Do you ever really know anything about Clint Eastwood in any of those westerns?
Well, in I'm blanking on the name of it.
Unforgiven?
Thank you. The Unforgiven, it's 2 hours or an hour and a half. So you can sort of project your own personality onto him in that hour and a half. But when you have 8 episodes, so I projected what I thought The Mandalorian was in the first 2 episodes, but by the 4th, 5th, 6th, I'm like, okay, I need more. Just enough. Like, tell me what he wants. Tell me what, I'll give you an example. When he drops off Baby Yoda, I didn't really get any sense of does he have remorse for dropping off this kid? Does he have feelings about, potentially handing over a baby to its death? I didn't get a sense of that. And then, yes, obviously he turns around and we all know that's what's going to happen, but I didn't get a sense.
I felt like I could tell from the look on his face that he was...
Yeah, right, exactly.
At least as much as you could ever tell from the look on Clint Eastwood's face.
I thought he was clearly conflicted about handing the baby over. Yeah. I don't know.
He was conflicted, but again, it's a little... I just wanted more from his character than they revealed. And I think towards the last 2 episodes or so, we get a little bit of that. My favorite character in all of this is Queel, the guy that was voiced by Nick Nolte, I have spoken. Because he has the most complete character development. He was a slave for the Empire. He said he worked several human lifetimes to buy his freedom. He just wants to be a moisture farmer on this far off planet, but he's willing to help the Mandalorian because he's so tired of all these other bounty hunters disturbing his peace. I was like, oh, this, and then, so when he dies at the end of the last episode, I was really sad because I was like, oh man, he was the most fully developed character for me, and he was just killed. So
he was very expensive.
Oh yeah, right.
Between the CG and the puppet and the voice actor, I imagine he was quite pricey.
Right. So, and the episode, what was it called? The Sanctuary, where they go to that, forest planet, and there's a Imperial Walker.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so that whole episode reminded me of every other 80s and 90s science fiction TV show. It was very much like a Stargate episode. Probably every episode of Stargate, it was like, they come to these people who are living a simple life, and they have to defend them against the evil mercenaries living outside. And like Magnificent Seven, they were playing off these tropes. Oh, we're gonna, protect the village. We're going to give them guns and teach them how to fight. And I was like, I've seen this plot 1,000 times, and it wasn't interesting to me at all. And we knew that he was never going to stay there like that. It was never a thought to me that would happen. And there was one moment, this kind of tender moment, I don't remember the woman's name, where he's like, I never take off my mask for anyone. And you sort of sense that, he might have taken it off for her. And that would have, it would have been more interesting to me to, explore that tension a little bit, where it was just sort of like, it was put there for a second and then dropped. And I get it. It was trying to show that, he's more faithful to his culture than anything else. That's his most important thing.
Well, let me pick up on that, because I'll qualify. I didn't actually love the sort of farmers. I agree with you. I thought that was they just seemed like sort of like helpless townspeople out of central casting, and I didn't understand why they were fishing with like bowls in the Star Wars universe. It seems like they should have.
But they had droids. They had droids to help. So why don't they just program the droids to fish?
Yeah. So I actually didn't love that, but I think it's interesting because what this show is doing is it's sort of like a like conscious repudiation of everything, all the advances that TV storytelling has made in the last 20 years or so. It doesn't have, it's sort of like, it does remind me of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., as I said. It's particularly in the middle, it gets very episodic, and it's simple and straightforward, and the characters are fairly straightforward, and it's just fun. And, I think a lot of your reaction to it is going to be whether you find that return to a simpler era of television to be sort of refreshing and nostalgic, or just kind of retrograde and a step backward.
I just want to talk about one of my favorite parts. It was, I'm not sure if it was the last episode or the second to last, when the two stormtroopers are like trying to,
oh god,
they're shooting at the target, and they're like, oh, do you want to look at the?
It's the best scene in the whole show.
The best scene, and I was like, why? Because it's first of all, they talk exactly like the stormtroopers do in the original trilogy. And they're just so dopey, and it's funny, but it's also really dark at the same time, because they're just like basically punching a baby. And I just was like, yeah, like if this show, not that I want more punching babies, but if this show really kind of captures that in the second season, that sort of playfulness, but also there's like a sinister element there, because that was what always Star Wars was, right? The evil force coming and the heroes coming to save it. So I just think like that tone for me was probably my favorite moment.
Okay, I have so much to say, but can I just say on that one point, that was precisely the moment where I hit pause and looked up who directed that episode, because I was like, there's something categorically different about this episode, and that's when I came across the name. And I was like, of course, if I were a betting woman, I would put large amounts of cash on the fact that whole scene was a Taika Waititi moment. Like, it's just classic. That's what he brings. And, Jon Favreau also has a good sense of humor. So, and I think he wrote that episode, but I just felt something was qualitatively different right at that moment.
It's a great scene.
You said you have a lot of stuff to say. Actually, how about, let's get Raj in here, and then we can come back to Erin. But so Raj, do you have anything, where do you come down on this?
Well, one thing I want to go back to the Sanctuary episode is I agree that like the minute we open up on that village, it felt like Farscape. It felt like, a lot of other things I've seen before. And, I think that, like you can even go back to like Battlestar Galactica for that general plot. But one thing I wanted to mention is Matt mentioned the Magnificent Seven, but one thing we haven't brought up is I think we talk about the Western stuff, but there are these Japanese roots in this show as well. So the Magnificent Seven building off of Seven Samurai, which is what that episode kind of was. And, with the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, you have a really strong lone wolf and cub thing there, which I think harkens back to the fact that Star Wars was heavily influenced by Hidden Fortress and stuff like that. So I think I like the fact that it's melding these influences that were.
Could you explain what is lone wolf and cub? Is that a specific reference or?
Yeah, so it's a Japanese. I think it started as a manga, but I don't really know all the history, which I feel ashamed of. But it's basically this samurai and a young girl that go around and go on adventures and things like that. And so it's the classic, I think, reference for, adult and child, have adventures together. So I think I really liked that parallel there, because it's such a weird and interesting thing. But the other thing I wanted to say is I agree that episode didn't really live up to what had previously been shown or what comes at the end. But I really like the fact that the big bad, the big, thing that was so difficult and dangerous was just an AT-ST walker, which we've seen many times before. And, Ewoks are able to kill them with 2 logs. But like on this scale, it's something that's devastating. And it takes, this big effort to kind of bring it down, which I appreciated. I liked seeing this smaller thing. I liked that they introduced the character of Cara Dune in that episode. I think for me, the weakest episode was the one where they go back to Tatooine. And even though I appreciated all the different references there, we get to see the cantina, I just really didn't like the plot. I thought it was so simplistic. It was a really short episode. I think it was like 35 minutes. And so I feel like there was this, it was the episode that felt the most like filler. And I think they were like relying on Tatooine to carry a lot of the work for us, to be like, oh, cool, he's back in a place that we recognize. And then otherwise it was pretty simplistic, like young bounty hunter, trying to get one up on him. And like at the end, he doesn't succeed. To me, that was a really weak episode and probably didn't deserve to be there. And although
that's how I felt about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like just exactly what you said is that they were relying too much on, like, I would be, I mean, again, unprovable hypothesis, but I'd be very curious to know how the reactions would be if you stripped away all this familiar Star Wars stuff and just set this in a completely fresh science fiction world, whether people would be nearly as excited about it. And I would suggest the answer is an emphatic no. And precisely because of that, I think they're relying too much on the gimmick of it being Star Wars and us being excited about hearing Jawas say UTD and us being excited about, going into Mos Eisley Cantina and all this kind of stuff without really doing the work.
Well, but I feel like the Rise of Skywalker, it was just like, hey, remember everything you loved about Star Wars? Here it all is in one movie. And that didn't move me at all. So, like, it's not just the fact that it's Star Wars that's working for people. Working for me anyway.
I mean, I don't mean to go that far with it. I'm suggesting that they're relying too heavily on it and that it's getting them across the finish line in some cases where that's not, what you should be relying on. And I did say that I had a bunch of other stuff to say, but I also cut off Raj, so sorry about that.
Oh no, it's okay. I mean, I think that's a good point. I really wonder if the whole thing, the whole show was rushed in a way, because yes. I feel like, it felt so inconsistent that they had to like come up with maybe episodes really quickly and we're like, let's stick these 3 in the middle. And they seem a diversion from the overall plot thread, which I think is the more compelling part. But yeah, I don't know. I still like it.
Yeah. And I really liked the last 2 episodes quite a bit. And as I said, I came away feeling optimistic, but I wanted to go back to something that Dave said before. I think there's a difference between being simple and being superficial. And you can have a very simple overall construction and do it well. And I think that the number one criticism I have of this show is it has no narrative patience. So moments that should land emotionally don't, because they didn't do the work to build up to that moment. And I can't remember, was it Matt who talked about the scene where the woman wants to take off the helmet? Yeah. That scene had 0 impact for me because I never believed for a moment he was going to take off the helmet, because I never believed for a moment there was a real relationship between those characters, because they didn't do the work. They had to, I mean, that's a moment that they should have been building toward over several episodes if they wanted it to mean anything. And there were so many examples of that. Like, for example, I don't know that I ever knew her name, but the blacksmith character.
Yeah, she's just called the Armorer, I think.
In episode 1 or 2, she hooks up the Mandalorian with this extra special missile set, and she's like, these are amazing, use them wisely if at all. And then he literally uses them like 45 seconds later. And same with the jetpack. She gives him the jetpack and she's like, this will only obey your commands after years of training. And 45 seconds later, he's blasting around on the jetpack. And I'm like, where's the narrative patience on this? Like, these are moments that you should be building toward. And my final point, to go back to the example of Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood is a great example, Dave, because he's got this inscrutable face. And you ask whether we ever really understand him. I would argue that you understand him way better, because not only does the movie give you some backstory at the beginning, they have the device of the younger gunslinger who's wide-eyed and has all these questions that, you know, Clint, when forced, laconically explains his motivations or his choices for A or B. You get so much more from that character right from the jump. And I actually thought when they went to Tatooine and they got this younger guy that maybe he was going to play that role, that he was going to have that role of the foil where we actually started to hear a little bit what was going on behind that mask, and they didn't do it.
All right, but I feel like comparing this to Unforgiven is a little unfair, because Unforgiven is the best Western that I'm familiar with.
True
and
enough.
it's also like consciously sort of a subversion / commentary on traditional Western movies. And it's like, you know, if you take all these familiar elements from Westerns, but here's what it would really be like in the real world, where it's gritty and crappy and people are real people and everything. And I think it's great, but like it relies on your knowledge of all these other Westerns that were more superficial, to use your word. And I mean, it would be great if they made like the Mandalorian Unforgiven, but I mean, that's a pretty high, ambitious goal.
And I'm not suggesting that. I'm really not.
You know, I'm happy just to have the like spaghetti Western Mandalorian, you know, but it's not high art or anything, but it's, you know, incredibly fun entertainment, as far as I'm concerned. Matt, what do you think?
So I feel like the show, as others have said, has started to get its legs in the last couple episodes. I agree. Like the middle few episodes really dipped a lot for me. The Tatooine episode, I didn't hate, and I think jumping off what Erin said, it probably was because we went back to Tatooine. I'm like, oh, cool, Tatooine. Oh, look, it's the Mos Eisley, you know, cantina. And then it was like the wool was pulled over my eyes. And then when it was over, I was like, well, that was kind of an empty episode. For me, I thought the weakest storytelling episode was The Prisoner, where I just thought we introduced all these other characters. They show up and then they just vanish. They also, I find that in the series that they do these weird things with plot that like, so I see this a lot in bad storytelling, where it's like the storyteller wants a specific thing to happen, so they manipulate the reality of the world to make that happen. And in the Prisoner example, it's this stupid beacon. Can I curse on this show? It's this fucking beacon. And it's like, oh, well, if you press this beacon, then you know, X-Wings come and blow you up. And I'm like,
that was the worst.
I'm like, okay, I guess that's the thing. But then it's like, oh, so you could just take that beacon and put it anywhere, and then the TIE fighter, I mean, the X-Wings come in, they're just like, well, that's the beacon, I guess we should blow it up. I mean, I just like, wait, what reality is this in? These guys just...
Even on the prison. Like, who are these guys? This is the Republic that we fought for. They're like, oh, somebody pushed a button, we better blow up everybody, no questions asked.
We better blow it up. And then... You know, why is this prison ship not traveling at hyperspace? Why is it traveling like through space at a slow speed? Like, I don't get that. So I don't know. There was just weird, really weird, stupid plot choices. Like especially in the last two episodes, even though I enjoyed them, it was like, well, we know it's a trap, and we know, you know, Grieve is we know Grief Karga is you know, probably going to betray us, but let's just give him the baby, and let's just walk into town when we know everybody is like, that all these bounty hunters and the remnants of the Empire are trying to find this baby. Let's just walk in there and not only walk in there, but let's put, my only defense in handcuffs. I mean, it was this stupid decision on, like, by any reckoning, that they did just because they needed to have Baby Yoda there. They needed to have all the characters there in the town at that moment to have that big fight scene. And then, Giancarlo Esposito show up, right? So I just found at times that I was really frustrated with the storytelling.
And can we spend some time, please, with Moff Gideon?
Wait. If this is good, I feel like this is getting too negative. So I'm gonna enforce some forced positivity.
I was just gonna say, like, that Giancarlo Esposito is one of my favorite television actors. He's played one of the most chilling television villains of all time. So they have some great raw clay to work with there. And so clearly their intentions with this series, at least I think so, were just to introduce him and let us know that he exists. And presumably he's a recurring big bad in the next season, which is one of the reasons that I'm excited. But one of the things that makes Giancarlo Esposito so amazing is he's such a subtle actor. So how you really get the best out of a subtle actor in a black cape in a Darth Vader outfit is going to be, surrounded by stormtroopers. It's about as subtle as a sledgehammer. So how you blend these two things, it's going to be really interesting to watch.
I really liked his character. Actually, he was the highlight of that. And I also didn't mention that IG-11, the bounty hunter droid, both before and after the reprogramming, was one of the highlights of this.
I feel like Taika Waititi should do, like, the majority of the voice acting work for CGI characters moving forward, because he's so good.
Yeah.
Well, so Raj, in our solo panel, you actually said you would like to see a show with, like, what's the lizard guy? Boz? And IG-88. So did this scratch that itch for you? Did you? Yeah,
I mean, I've always wanted kind of more of a bounty hunter, scum and villainy type focus, and so I think that was great. Like, it harkens back to the Han shoots first era of Star Wars, where, there's a point at which the Mandalorian, who I guess his name's Din Djarin, right? Who he disintegrates a couple Jawas, I think, just right off the bat. And, nothing much is made of it. He doesn't feel super guilty or whatever. And I kind of liked that idea, of focus. It doesn't all have to be apologized for and turned into a big moral thing, because that's not what this show is about. And we know he does have morals, and, he feels bad about, he goes and rescues Baby Yoda and so on.
Well, actually, let me say, and also he shoots IG-11 in the head,
right.
Basically he shoots him in the back, basically, in a very, like, Han shoots first kind of thing. And there's no going back and CGIing it to make it, less ruthless and everything. Actually, I hadn't thought about that, but it's a really good point.
It's funny you mentioned Bosk, because I was talking with some friends about, what we would like to see in season 2. And I think I read something that they're going to they're planning to put in more references to, stuff that we know. So I'd love to see Bosk show up in this show, since, there's not really any information about what he did after he shows up in Empire Strikes Back, as far as I'm aware. Maybe he showed up in the books or something, but, it would be cool to see something like that. That would actually make me quite happy. But yeah, I love seeing the IG robot, and, we see IG-88 in Empire Strikes Back in basically one tiny scene. The camera pans and you see him standing there. And I know IG-88 has popped up in a lot of the expanded universe stuff, but just watching that robot or droid, arms spinning around and head and shooting all those guys in that episode, I thought was really kind of fun. And also shows, that character shows the Mandalorian's arc about droids, which I agree is very simplistic. Like, I don't like droids because droids kill my family. But it's at the end,
so obvious.
But, and I'll agree that those flashbacks were a bit laborious and just kept coming back in the same way. But I'm starting to come down on the side that I think that they were they were rushed to get this show out because of Disney Plus coming out, and they wanted to have this around the time of the movies, maybe, or whatever. And so I agree with Matt that there are a lot of shortcuts and weird manipulations, but I'll still go back and watch it, and I think I'll still enjoy it for what it is. Even though I do recognize that there are some of those things there. But yeah, I think because it's just fun for me to watch.
Actually, speaking of shortcuts and weird manipulations, I just want to mention, I just read an article about this, which I thought was interesting. But so, in most of the movies, when the actors are acting against a digital background, it's just a green screen, right? And so in this one, they had actual screens showing the scenery, right, that they filmed people in front of. And
I just read that. Yeah.
And so they actually built those environments in the Unreal Engine, the video game engine, from what I understand. And then the lighting matches better. And then the actors, like, they kind of know, like, if they're looking out to the horizon, they know where the horizon is. They're not just staring at a green screen and having to guess. And then it's a lot cheaper, obviously, too. And so I don't know, I thought that was interesting. Because I mean, the show does seem to have, employed some, up by your bootstraps kind of tricks and stuff to sort of a scrappy underdog kind of show. I mean, I think it had a huge budget, but compared to, The Rise of Skywalker or something, I think this show is definitely punching above its weight. But so, Erin, if you were forced to say anything nice about this show, which is in fact the situation that you find yourself in, what would those be?
I have said a lot of nice things about the show. You just aren't listening. You're just focusing on the negative things that I'm saying. There are lots of things that I liked about the show. I could go on for months about Pedro Pascal, although largely not on the strength of this show, because you don't get much of him. But he does perfectly with the voice acting for this. Is this really him under the suit? I assume.
Part of the time. He has a stand-in that's
got to be a tough gig.
It. Like the episode Sanctuary, or I think that's the one. He's not in that at all, actually, except for his voice. So.
Oh, really? Okay. Anyway, I thought that honestly, I think they must have a pretty generous budget, because by and large, the special effects are really impressive. I thought the Ugnaught was really impressive. Queel. I thought Baby Yoda was super cute. I have mixed feelings on Baby Yoda overall, but I kind of understand why they went that route, and I liked it. I liked the last two episodes a lot. The Stormtrooper scene was awesome. I think that they really do have a good platform to build from. I just wish they had a little bit more narrative patience. And I also feel like if you're going to do the rando episodes where you have, for example, The Prisoner, which has no obvious connection to the overall story arc, I quite like that. And I think it makes good sense in the overall scheme of we're kind of doing a Western. But then those are the moments where maybe you could have a little bit more fun with it and be a little bit less obvious with it. So, and again, I go back to Firefly as an example of this, where if you're going to have those kind of, I hesitate to call them filler episodes, but those sort of interstitial spaces that aren't necessarily connected to the bigger ones, then I think they need to be comparatively stronger as a cohesive whole on their own. They need to be a great short story. If they're not a chapter in the novel, they need to be a great short story. And I think that's possibly why those middle episodes seem to sag more than the others. So I would kind of like to see more emphasis. I'd like to do more of those poking your noses into other corners of the galaxy that we haven't seen before, maybe with a little hint of what we have seen before. And I think they have a lot of potential to do that well.
I guess one thing I'll say for the show is that I feel like, I mean, you talk about it sagging, which I think that was a pretty common critical response, was that the middle episodes weren't as strong. But I feel like one thing I really appreciated about the show is that it's 8 episodes. You know, the episodes are fairly short. You know, it's not like there's not a lot of pointless subplots. I'm not sure there are any subplots. I'm trying to think, you know, like within the individual episodes. And so I felt like the pace was pretty snappy myself, and that, you know, it was like reading a comic book or something, you know, like you get in, you get out, you have fun, and it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Are we in Mando's point of view, all 8 episodes? I think we are. Like we never
Yeah.
show anyone else's character.
Like there's not a scene that he's not in, right?
Right.
Unless I'm forgetting something.
I think one of the things that I have a question about, if you guys have seen, so my Star Wars exposure is the feature films by and large. I read the books. Were they the expanded universe books? I don't know what you call the ones that came out in the 90s.
Yeah.
I read those, but I haven't read any of the newer books. I haven't seen any of the animated series. So I didn't have a lot of backstory on Mandalorians. And while, I've been talking about narrative patience, so I'm certainly there for getting information in dribs and drabs. I felt like we didn't get enough about Mandalorian culture in general. I think there seemed to be an assumption that maybe some viewers knew more than they did, or that it wasn't important. And I would kind of question either of those decisions. But I personally felt like I just had a lot of questions that I would have liked to see a little bit more of that, particularly if you're using it to kind of fill in some blanks about this largely inscrutable main character that you have. So I'm just wondering, is that something that comes out quite a bit more in the animated series?
I don't know if anyone else has watched. I've watched Clone Wars and Rebels. So they talk about Mandalorians and the planet that they come from and sort of the history during the Clone War era. And then there's a little bit that comes after that. I think the purge that they're referring to, unless I'm mistaken, is not covered in the animated shows. So it's something that looks like the Empire did something to Mandalore after both of those series where it looks like they basically demolished the whole culture in some ways. Yeah, so
they took their steel, right? They took their Beskar steel and used it for spaceships.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember what the explanation was, but Beskar, I think there have been references to things like that in the past, but this show has been, a lot of the details that they added in here about, the armor and this is the way and all that kind of stuff, I think is new information that hasn't been covered before. That the only thing that's been covered in detail, to my knowledge, and I don't have a categoric, recall of everything that I've watched over the years, but is the Darksaber, which is the thing that appears at the very end of the last episode.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah.
That was
a Mandalorian weapon, right?
It's basically a lightsaber, but there was one Mandalorian who became a Jedi called Tar Vizsla, I think his name is, and he created, that was his lightsaber. It was called the Darksaber. It was like black instead and kind of crackly, looks more like a katana. And so basically that was his weapon. And then the Jedi kept it after he died, and then the Mandalorian stole it back, and it became the symbol of the Mandalore, who's like the leader of the Mandalorians, basically, that they're kind of president or ruler or whatever. And I think the last time it was seen was in the Rebels animated series, where it was given to the person who was going to become the new leader of Mandalore, but that was the last time. So I think what they're trying to imply is that this guy, Moff, what was his name again? I forgot. Moff
Gideon.
I think it's
Gideon.
Gideon.
Moff Gideon. Yeah, who basically, who was around during the Purge, kind of stole it from the Mandalorians. So.
Let me say, because there's kind of an interesting story that I heard Dave Filoni tell about how the Darksaber came about. I don't remember all the details, and I haven't watched any of the animated show, so a lot of that wouldn't mean a lot to me. But there was some fight that they had choreographed for one of these things, and they had some weapon. Someone was going to be fighting a Jedi with some weapon, and George Lucas saw it, and he was like, "No, a lightsaber would cut right through this weapon. You got to change this." And they're like, we already choreographed it and rigged it, and we're all set to go, And so so George Lucas was like, all right, well, hold on, we'll come up with something. And so he came back. He's like, all right, we're changing this to this new thing I just came up with called a Darksaber, and a lightsaber won't cut through a Darksaber. And then all this mythology has grown up around it, but that's how the origin was to address this problem, because they had already done this scene.
That's how you do all your quality writing. You retrofit from a corner that you've painted yourself into. But I'm curious to figure out how the whole Clone Wars and Boba Fett and Jango Fett and all of that, how they fit into this lore.
I mean,
it's a kind of a square peg in a round hole at the moment.
It's so, as far as I've been able to tell, Jango Fett, who Boba Fett is his clone / son. I believe the current understanding is that he isn't actually Mandalorian, but that he has Mandalorian armor, which I'm not sure the exact, canon level of this whole thing, but in this
scavenged it from some Mandalorian who was killed or something.
Yeah, but this show sets up the fact that I would assume it wasn't just after the purge that there's this history of taking in people from other places as foundlings and raising them in the way. So, maybe they'll try to link that together in some way. I hope that there's some reference to Boba Fett in this series, just because it seems like there would have to be, being like the only other significant Mandalorian that people know of. I've heard some people say that the legs that we see at the end of the Tatooine episode, they think that that's him, but I guess we'll see.
I thought that was supposed to be Moff Gideon.
Yeah,
but there's just one of some of these YouTube videos I watched. You can actually see Boba Fett in the background of one of the shots when they're in the hall of the Mandalorians or whatever. Like really, really, it's really, really in the background and really, really dark. But if you like freeze it and zoom in, it's him. But it might just be.
But he's dead at this point, right?
Nobody's ever dead in Star Wars.
They brought the Emperor back, so
that's true. Spoiler. Well, kind of, not really. I guess it's from the last.
It's in the trailer.
Yeah. But yeah, they're going to have to do it. Boba Fett is essentially the OG from which all of this is built, right? And so the timeline confuses me too, because all of that business around the Clone Wars is way before.
Yeah.
So yeah I'm just.
But I think
definitely holding my breath on how they're going to fit all of these pieces together. Yeah,
the timeline is interesting because it seems like the Mandalorian character Din Djarin or whatever, he lived through, at least when he was a kid, he lived through part of the tail end of the Clone Wars because his family was killed by those super battle droids or whatever. So, he's lived through at least part of that, before A New Hope era. And this, Dave, do you know how long this takes place after Return of the Jedi? Because that's where
I think it said 5 years.
Okay. So Boba Fett, goes into the Sarlacc 5 years previously. I think there's all kinds of ways you can
still being digested.
Or, he could have gotten out in some way or somebody rescues him or whatever. And so he could be kicking around.
That would be so lame.
Well, I never read any of these, but I've heard that in the comics or something, he fires his jetpack and gets out of the Sarlacc.
Yeah.
And then he has all sorts of other adventures. So there is sort of, precedent for that.
I also think that a lot of the characters we saw who, as Matt said, we see in one episode and then they're just kind of gone at the end. I think we're going to see them, or at least some of them, come back in the next season. I think a lot of this was setting up future threads, or at least I hope that's the case, because I do think that there's a lot that still needs to be explored with some of that stuff.
I was definitely assuming Bill Burr was going to come back.
Yeah.
Because you see those characters, in the prison cell at the end.
And Ming-Na Wen, who was in it basically for like all of a minute and a half, and then dies. She's the bounty hunter on Tatooine, not the young one, the one that they're chasing. It seemed like a criminal underuse of somebody like that, but I've talked to people who think for sure she's coming back, especially since there was that kind of coda at the end where she could have been, I suppose, rescued and thrown into a bacta tank or something like that. Maybe fused,
resurrected with dark. If that was Moff Gideon, she could have been resurrected with some sort of evil force magic.
Do you think he has the Force?
Can we talk about Force healing for a second?
I was just assuming since he had the lightsaber type thing that he was a Force user.
Could be.
I guess they didn't establish that necessarily. But yeah, Erin, go ahead.
I've been trying to think whether. So the only instances of Force healing that I can remember are
actually wait. Let me add. Okay, and another point in favor of him being a Force user is that he's really, really interested in getting his hands on Baby Yoda.
True,
right? And it seems like that there's got to be a connection there.
Yeah. So not to bring the movies back into it, but I think one of the things that this consistent criticism of the more recent trilogy, which I think is valid, is that there's people doing all sorts of things with the Force that we've never seen people do with the Force before. And just incredibly powerful things, even by the standards of what they were able to do in the first movies. I can't remember Force healing being a thing until it was suddenly just a huge thing in the latest movie. And then Baby Yoda does the Force healing in this show. That, for me, that seemed to come up out of nowhere. But is there precedent for that I've forgotten?
There definitely has been in some of the expanded universe stuff. And I'm a big fan of there being other applications for the Force that we haven't seen. I agree that it probably would have come up previously. It should have come up previously because, you know, during the Clone Wars, for example, if somebody gets hurt, you should have seen a Jedi being like, "That's okay, I got you."
It's got to be consistent in universe. Like if you're able to solve these problems
and they may have,
with a wave
actually.
of your hand, if you can grab a spaceship with the Force and move it around, then.
But that's been established, I would say, because size matters not, right? You can lift a starship
to a degree, but there is still a shocking lack of consistency in how these abilities are dealt with in terms of solving narrative problems.
But the thing is, like, that's been true, like, ever since A New Hope, right? Like, every power that gets introduced in Star Wars was introduced to solve, you know, for a specific scene, to, you know, create a specific dramatic moment in that scene. And there's never been any overall plan for what the Force can do.
Also, Luke never got his full training because obviously he was impatient and couldn't stick around with Yoda, and Obi-Wan died.
That's why it worked. That's why it worked, is we had a frame in which the neophyte was our main character, so our main character didn't know much more about it than we did. And so we were all learning together as we went along, so you could accept that these things were happening that people believed couldn't possibly exist. So, I think I would argue it worked in the earlier films in a way that's getting harder and harder to justify.
I just agree with Raj. Once Yoda says size matters not, like, anything is possible. Like, so if you want to talk about the Force jumping the shark, like, it jumped the shark in Empire Strikes Back, as far as I'm concerned.
I jumped the mine.
But I also feel like for me, the Force, you know, we know that the Force is part of the, you know, the life of the universe and moves through all living creatures. And so using the Force to help accelerate healing or heal somebody or give them life energy or whatever, to me makes perfect sense in what we know about the Force. I agree that it's weird that we haven't seen a lot of it before and suddenly we're seeing a lot of it now. But to me, that's something that's in keeping. You know, you have the kind of, if you're going to look at the Force, which I don't like to do as a polar thing where you have light and dark, if dark can be used to damage, then light should be able to be used to heal. You know, they should be both two sides of the same coin in my mind. I'm more interested in how this 50-year-old baby knows how to do this stuff intuitively, because that's something that, you know, I'm wondering what they're going for here. Is it that, you know, this species of alien just intuitively taps into the Force, and that's a really weird thing to think about. Or, you know, other
They've
people
got lots of midichlorians in their blood, Raj.
Or you know, is it a clone? Is it something like that? You know, I don't know. We haven't gotten into the Baby Yoda thing.
I think it's 100% a clone because the scientist has a insignia on his shoulder, which is the same as the people who cloned the clone army in the second, in episode 2. But I want to get Matt in here. Matt, do you have anything you want to add? Because we haven't gotten back to you for a while.
I want to say that 50 years as a baby, that's a lot of diapers to change. I mean, that's a huge commitment, right? As an adult, you know, you're like, do you want to have a kid? I don't know. 75 years of changing a diaper, and then he doesn't go to college until he's 200.
And we never get one scene of the Mandalorian struggling with a baby. What do I feed it? What do I do with this? Like, it's just
that was the thing. It was just like, yeah, get the baby Yoda some bone broth. He'll be fine. And it's like he is fine, but it's yeah, exactly. I was like, well, it's a baby, like, right? I mean, what does it eat? I mean, I guess it eats lizards, right? Which was great, by the way. Like, this cute little thing just devouring that lizard. I thought that was cool.
But I think that, like, one thing is that they were really smart was to not overuse Baby Yoda. Like, I think, you know, he's used very sparingly, and I think that if you used him much more than they did, it would get pretty ridiculous from my point of view.
As far as the Force healing goes, I think it's true with any magical system, because the Force is essentially a type of magic, is that there has to be consequences. You can't, maybe not consequences, but it can't be unlimited. So if you can just heal someone and then that's it, then to me that wouldn't work. But if it seems to me that when Baby Yoda healed Grief Karga, that he passed out, right? Because he got exhausted, and every time he uses he seems to pass out, and so maybe if they showed a little bit more of that, like, oh, he's really weak. Why is he so weak? Oh, well, he's using the Force, too much or something. He's overextended himself. Yeah, I mean that didn't really bother me so much.
Yeah, it didn't bother me at all. I just, and particularly because we had just seen it in the last film, it's clearly part of the lore, and it makes sense that the Force could be used that way. I'm confused about how it's popping up now, and it hasn't ever come up before.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of internal consistency problems in the series as a whole. I mean, in the whole like canon, in the movies specifically, where when the first few movies it takes days or at least hours to travel to another star system, and then in like Rogue One it takes minutes. So it just was like, well, yeah, I don't know how that works with what you've established, but I'm willing to overlook a lot of these inconsistencies if the story is good. And for the most part, I think, episode by episode, some of the stories really worked. And if people said, would you recommend watching it? I say absolutely. I think it's fun. It's Star Wars universe. People don't go into Star Wars, expecting, the type of, depth of something like Breaking Bad or The Wire. We know it's going to be fun. It's going to be, adventure. But at the same time, I felt that, I thought that they could have done a lot more character development, with the Mandalorian specifically, and the lore.
Well, let me say too, it occurs to me too that, I mean, the Mandalorian is basically kind of like Boba Fett. I mean, the whole reason this show exists is because people love Boba Fett so much. And Boba Fett is in like 7 minutes of the original trilogy and has like 5 lines. And his appeal is basically that he's so mysterious and you don't know everything about him and there's not a ton of character development. And so I feel like maybe it would be kind of, not true to that whole character or that whole appeal if there was a lot of character development, if you knew his whole backstory in extreme detail.
I still think that you can have a kind of cryptic or mysterious character and still build elements. Like, so you can kind of chip away at the sides. All right, well, we know that his parents were killed by droids in the Clone War. We know that at some point he lost his armor, right? Or at least the Mandalorian culture did. We know he's never shown his face to anyone. These are like little things that they've built up, but those to me seem all very superficial and generic, and I wanted to see something very personal. I wanted to see why. Why does he spare the baby? I mean, maybe it's because he identifies Baby Yoda, like he sees himself in Baby Yoda and say, oh, I was an abandoned child, which I think is what they were going for. But like little things like that where I just wanted to know more of him personally. And right now, he seems a little too generic for me.
Well, let me say, so I think the issue, I think it would be a mistake for the Mandalorian to be well developed, because I think he's more interesting as a sort of enigma. But then the issue, as everyone's pointing out, is that nobody is really well characterized. Mm-hmm. And so I think what this show maybe needs is like a Watson kind of character. So like Sherlock Holmes
That's what remains... I said. Sorry.
Sorry, Erin.
No, I'm just agreeing with you emphatically. That's exactly what it needs.
Yeah. So like, and I think maybe, did you say, Erin, that maybe you wish that the young bounty hunter had stuck around and he maybe could have become that sort of character? Like, we need someone who's like,
we need a foil.
We can relate to, and who's well characterized, and whose motivations and backstory we understand and relate to and know. But I think but it shouldn't be the Mandalorian, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, you were talking about Firefly before, and I think, the strength of Firefly is just the banter between all the characters, and in that banter you learn so much about them. And because the Mandalorian's so quiet, and half the time he's with Baby Yoda who doesn't speak, we're not really getting any of that, of his character. So it's all this big question mark, which that we're all just projecting our own version of the Mandalorian, which works to an extent. I'm not saying that I want to know like everything he did for his last 40 years of his life. I just a little bit more as to who he is as an individual. That's all.
I agree with that, and I think so. To go back to what we were saying before about having this, and whether I'm not saying that it should have been that junior bounty hunter character, but somebody who plays that same role that I referred to earlier of the junior gunslinger in Unforgiven. It's through.
I thought Cara Dune. I thought the woman from the farming planet, Cara Dune. I thought she was gonna. Oh, now she's gonna be traveling around with him. Like I thought it was gonna be like him picking up characters along the way to help him. Which is
the way to do it, in my opinion, because like Dave said, I think it is important, and it's part of. You've got a guy who's going to spend his entire on-screen time behind a mask, and so absolutely lean into that. And have him be, and it fits with the Western tropes, have him be inscrutable and a man of few words. But then you need to fill in the blanks somewhere. And even if those blanks entirely consist of having a bunch of people around doing the Morgan Freeman, what the hell is going on in your head right now anyway? Having them kind of bounce off him in a way and reinforce the sort of two-dimensional quality that he's bringing. By having you need to have three-dimensional characters around him to make it clear that that's a deliberate choice and that this is a fundamental part of who he is and not just lazy writing. And I think it's doable, but I do think that he needs to have a Watson. He needs to have somebody who can, in those moments where we need a little bit more interior monologue than we're ever going to get, when we need somebody on screen to be like, should we really be handing in Baby Yoda or something just to emphasize those points? I think there needs to be that in order for us to, we don't have to understand him, but we do have to attach to him somehow, even if it's via a third party.
Yeah. So I think we've basically solved the issue with this show. So I hope that the creators of Star Wars are listening to this, like they obviously listened to our solo panel, so that, we can get this all straightened out for season 2. But I still maintain that this show was a blast, and I loved every minute of it. And we're pretty much out of time. So I don't know, does anyone have any other final thoughts to throw in here at the end? So Raj, any final thoughts?
Looking forward to the second season, and I thought the other day that one cool thing that they could do that would harken back to the original trilogy would be to go back to Dagobah at some point. But
that would be cool.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to the next season, which I guess won't be out for another almost a year. But I really enjoyed it.
Erin, final thought.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to season 2. As I said, I felt like the show started to hit its stride toward the end. And that's fairly common in a pilot season overall, I think. So as much as I had a sort of mixed response to this first season, I am optimistic about season 2. And if for no other reason, there's just such an amount of talent assembled on screen and behind the scenes for this project that you have to think that they're going to come up with something that's, if they have a little bit more time to find a rhythm and make the total more than the sum of its parts, that something great's going to come out of it.
And Matt, final thought.
I agree pretty much with both with what Erin and Raj said. I'm excited about season 2. I think that season 1 had enough promise, extremely high production values that I'll definitely be watching 2 when it comes out.
All right, cool. So we have spoken. So,
you were just waiting for that.
Been waiting 90 minutes to say that.
Yeah.
All right. So we have spoken, in fact, with Erin Lindsey, Rajan Khanna, and Matthew Kressel. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Erin Lindsey, Rajan Khanna, and Matthew Kressel for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.